And now, from the Room 111 studios, it's Hacking Engagement with James Sternovich.
Well, hey there, listener, and welcome back to the Hacking Engagement podcast. And like always, I'm so glad you're here. Well, last week, boy, I went on a yak fest with the HyperDocs girls, with Kristen Kovac. I mean, we got it done in the verbiage department. And this episode's different. It's short, it's tight, but boy, is it powerful. Now, I got to tell you this quick story. So a few years back, my wife and I watched this movie called The Jersey Boys. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. And then we had the opportunity to go to the Broadway show, The Jersey Boys, and oh, baby, there was no comparison. It was one of the best date nights my wife and I have ever had. It was awesome. Now, on the flip side of that, I don't like live recorded music. When my Spotify feed or my Pandora feed throws up the Isley Brothers in concert, I'm like, nah, I'll just listen to the Isley Brothers when they record it. It sounds a lot better. Well, so here's where I come out of all this. You know, sometimes, if you see an author, if you see a presentation, I went to see the Daily Show with Jon Stewart one time live. It was really cool. Sometimes we have to be like the Broadway presentation of the Jersey Boys or Jon Stewart coming to Columbus, Ohio and bringing his show. We need to be like that for our kids. There are times, people, that we need to be the sage on stage. Now, I know that goes against popular thinking in education right now, but there's times we need to do it. We need to get in front of those kids and we need to inspire them. And you're talking to a guy who flips most of his presentations. Just about a month ago, the lovely Kristen Kovac comes sauntering in the class and she says, Sternovich, you need to try Pear Deck. So I tried it and I was hooked immediately. I was all over it, man. And what I loved about it is it takes the really cool engagement and collaboration tools that you find with Edpuzzle, which Tracy Enos talked about so eloquently earlier in the year, and it embeds them in a live presentation. So this relatively short podcast is going to be about how you can take Pear Deck and transform your live presentations into something that's going to set your kids on fire, just like my wife and I were seeing the Ohio Theater watching the Jersey Boys live. Buckle up, man. You're going to love this episode. Hey, so get this, listener. My publisher contacts me and says, I love the way Hacking Engagement is selling. How about doing 50 more? I was all over it like a cheap suit. So the name of the book is Hacking Engagement Again, 50 Teacher Tools That Will Make Students Love Your Class. And it's going to be available on Amazon's virtual shelves in the late summer of 2017. In the meantime, if you're looking for more teacher empowerment resources, as always, visit hacklearning.org. Now let's get back to the solutions part of the Hacking Engagement podcast. Hey, if you haven't guessed already, I'm a huge fan of Pear Deck, and I'm going to explain why that's the case. You know, if you're somebody who flips a lot of their material like I do, you have a danger of losing contact with your students. You still need to get up in front of them and present now and then. And you also have to be careful, particularly if you're using other people's videos like John Green's Crash Course of History or Khan Academy, that you really might lose touch with your students. And that's why I'm such a big fan of teachers who flip presenting their own material. You also have to be careful of the length. I mean, you think about the young Sternovich sitting in the history lecture hall and just dozing off, even though I love history. So I would be very careful of the length of my presentation. And I've talked about that a lot before. So what is Pear Deck? Quite simply, it's this platform which allows you to insert prompts during the presentation. It leads to a lot more collaboration and a lot more engagement. It's that simple. So what you do is you take a Google slide presentation, a PowerPoint, and you simply upload it to Pear Deck once you've created an account, which is easy. And then you insert prompts into the presentation. Or, as the presentation is unfolding, you can insert a prompt on the fly. I did both for my maiden voyage. It was simple. Once the students start responding, you can choose when to display these anonymous responses, which students find fascinating to see how their peers responded to the same question. The students gain access to your Pear Deck presentation much in the same way that students would gain access to a Kahoot game. It's simple. You give them a website and they type in an invite code and bam, they're in. You don't have to be in a Google school to do this. It's not necessary. Here's one thing that I loved about Pear Deck, and I loved it from the second I started presenting. I present in a pretty well-lit room, and I have a smart board in front of the room, and I project images on that smart board, but sometimes it's a little light in my room, and the image quality, particularly for kids that are in the back row, isn't what I want it to be. The great thing about Pear Deck right out of the chutes is students are looking at the great images that you insert into your presentations on their device. It's right in front of them. And then you control the pace. And if you have any problem at all trying to figure out how to use this platform, there's wonderful tutorial videos. And like I said, Kristen Kovac walked in and said, Sturdivant, you need to try this. I tried it, and it only took me minutes to figure out. Okay, so how did your humble narrator first use Pear Deck? Well, it was at the end of the semester. My dual credit class was done. We finished a week earlier than the rest of the kids. Another advantage to my class. And my kids are kind of sitting around looking at each other, and I thought, well, I'm going to do something with them. So I gave them some choices as a historical movie that they could watch, and they chose Anthropoid. Anthropoid came out last year. It's a movie about the assassination of Reinhold Heydrich, who was Hitler's number 3, who was in charge of the occupation of Czechoslovakia. Miserable individual, did unspeakable things to the Czech people. And the Czech government in exile in London decides that they're going to take this guy out. So they recruit these Czech soldiers, parachute him into Czechoslovakia, and they do a number on Mr. Heydrich. And that's what the movie's about. But the movie is also about a moral dilemma. So I open up this Pear Deck as an introduction to this movie, a topic, believe it or not, that my students don't know much about. I mean, most World War II topics they're pretty familiar with, but this one they weren't. And I started out with a great hook, and that's what's beautiful about Pear Deck. It's so easy to slide in those hooks. So here's my hook. Your hometown is occupied by a foreign power that's incredibly abusive and murders a lot of citizens. You are a member of the resistance. You have the opportunity to kill high-ranking officials, which could short-circuit the occupation of your town. However, you know that in retaliation for this act, that the occupying power will probably torture and execute many of your friends and relatives. Do you pull the trigger? So I just threw that question out to them without any context whatsoever, and then they had to think of how they would respond to that, and then they collaborated with one another. It was awesome. And then I showed some images of Reinhold Heydrich, a map of Czechoslovakia, and I embedded some more questions. Immediately, and this is where students are so honest. They were like, this was really cool. We loved this little thing called Pear Deck. And those unsolicited compliments are what really get me going. And you make sure that you migrate over to my show notes, and I'll show you some links on how you can get started. Just remember, Pear Deck does for live presenting what Edpuzzle does for flipped presenting. So here we are at the What You Can Do Tomorrow section, and one thing that you can rest assured about education is we tend to overdo stuff. So when you hear this statement, now you don't want to be the sage on stage, you want to be the guide on the side. Well, daggone it, sometimes you need to be the sage on stage. You'll lose touch with your students if you aren't. And Pear Deck is a fantastic way to make that presentation, when you're the sage on stage, collaborative. So navigate to Pear Deck and watch their brief tutorials. The videos are short and incredibly easy to apply. Like most online education tools, you can pay if you want, but I found that the free version works just fine. Thank you. Select or create a brief Google Slides or PowerPoint presentation. I like to keep mine at under 10 slides. Please be careful of your presentation length. Insert a fabulous hook into your first slide, and dilemmas constitute great hooks. This will get your kids thinking and collaborating from the start. Finally, prompt students through Pear Deck to respond. Display student responses once all kids have answered. Waiting to display anonymous responses will eliminate the peer pressure factor. Include a multiple choice prompt midway through the presentation and a short answer or multiple choice assessment question at the end. Pear Deck creates a collaborative and engaging presentation environment, just like Edpuzzle does with flipped lectures. Embrace this new way to present and enthrall your kids. And good luck tomorrow engaging your students.
Show notes for this episode can be found at jamesalansturdivant.com. If you enjoy Hacking Engagement, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes.